when Thomas asked for a divorce for the 5th time this year. I agreed. After years of one-sided devotion, I finally chose to let go as he drifted further away from our marriage. After the divorce, I set out for a war-torn region abroad to begin my first mission as a Medicine Sans Frontieres doctor. But I didn't expect the field hospital to be bombed just a week later. Most likely, I wouldn't be making it back alive. Chapter 1. As I signed my name on the last page of the divorce agreement, Thomas's cold, emotionless face finally showed a flicker of change. "Aren't you going to read the terms carefully?" he asked. I shook my head. I had already skimmed it. Half a page of assets under the woman's name. No need for details. I already knew that wealth could sustain me for several lifetimes. I slowly folded the agreement and handed it to my lawyer. Not a word was spoken the entire time. Thomas, watching this, seemed even more puzzled. This was the 5th time he'd asked for a divorce this year. I had turned him down flatly the first 4 times. I'd loved him since we were young. Years of persistence had finally brought us together. I cherished this hard-won marriage more than anyone. That's why I stubbornly believed no problem could ever force Thomas and me to divorce. And if one did exist, it only meant we hadn't found the right solution yet. It wasn't until Autumn came to see me that I finally woke up. She was a fresh graduate who had joined Thomas's company a year ago. He had mentioned her before, a lively, clever intern. He spoke of her casually, but I remembered vividly how the corners of his lips curved slightly when he did. Looking back, the signs were all there. Autumn sat across from me in a loose dusty pink dress, gently stroking her barely rounded belly. Then she pulled out an ultrasound report and told me, "I'm pregnant with Thomas's child. 4 months. My first reaction was disbelief. My hand trembled as I held the report, but I feigned calm and asked, "Any proof?" As if expecting my refusal to believe without seeing the coffin. She took out her phone and showed me a photo. Just one glance, and I felt dizzy. It was a mirror selfie of Thomas and Autumn. He stood behind her, his chin resting against her fair shoulder, his hands gently placed on her belly. They looked just like a blissful couple awaiting their first child. "He told me you kept refusing to divorce. I didn't want to see you kept in the dark, so I figured I should tell you myself." Her voice was soft, but the look in her eyes held faint mockery, as if revealing the truth to me was some kind of charitable act. She lifted her coffee cup and took a slow sip. The air hung still for a moment. My eyes reddened, but not a single tear would fall. In my mind, scenes of Thomas and I together flashed like a cruel slideshow. All of it, crushed in an instant by a report and a photo. After a long pause, I looked at the poised Autumn. Slowly, I removed my wedding ring and slipped it into my pocket. The classic diamond-encrusted band was something I had designed with the jeweler over sleepless nights. 3 years of marriage, and I had never once taken it off. Until now. This act said it all. I would agree to the divorce. Across from me, Autumn's eyes lit up, her face unable to hide the joy. I picked up my bag, looked at her calmly, and said, "You're pregnant. You should ease up on the coffee. After all, you're going to be a mother now." Chapter 2. I knew exactly when their affair began. It was around 10 months ago, when I traveled to the Wadden region for international humanitarian aid. The mission wasn't particularly dangerous at the time. The domestic rescue team sent over was well-equipped and well-staffed. I took part in that mission not only to gain experience, but also to meet the field requirements to join Medicine Sans Frontieres. It was a rare opportunity, one I couldn't afford to miss. My great-grandfather had been a military doctor who saved countless lives during the war. He had marched with the army, treating wounded soldiers on the battlefield. He was the pride of our family, and my lifelong role model. As a child, I often listened to my father recount his stories, treating the wounded under fire. Fearless in sacrifice, skilled in medicine, devoted to the people, willing to give, loyal to the country. Amid the smoke and gunfire of war, my great-grandfather gave everything to save others. His unwavering spirit, forged in blood, shaped the ideals of our family. Those bedtime stories were what lulled me to sleep, and in my dreams, I always saw myself becoming a doctor. Before heading to the Wadden region, I had told Thomas, "This trip may take 6 months to a year." He had nodded slowly in response. Beneath his silver-rimmed glasses, his eyes looked at me with concern. He gave me careful reminders about staying safe. I remembered each one. Then I walked up behind him and said softly, "Thomas, I'm finally one step closer to my dream." He gently took my hand resting on his shoulder, affectionately nuzzling his cheek against it. A soft chuckle escaped his lips as he said warmly, "My little Dr. Robin is finally stepping into the bigger world." Yes, I was finally bringing all I had learned into the real world. But Thomas, in the sleepless nights that followed, I could never understand how, while I was saving lives on the front lines, you were creating a new one with someone else. When I came back, dusty, drained, and shaken by my first experience in a war zone, your eyes held something I couldn't unsee. Even though you tried to hide it, I saw it clearly. Disgust. You didn't even bother to pretend anymore. You gave all kinds of reasons for divorce. That the love was gone. That I hadn't tried to get pregnant during our 3 years of marriage. That my career was unstable and always changing. At the time, I genuinely thought it was because I'd been gone too long. That I had neglected our marriage. But no, you had already chosen the most disgraceful way to betray over a decade we spent together. On the day we were scheduled to finalize the divorce, I arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau early. Thomas showed up late. He looked tired, worn around the eyes. After we signed the divorce papers, I told him I knew about Autumn's pregnancy. He looked shocked. His voice wavered slightly as he asked, "She told you?" I nodded. He stared at me for a long time, as if hoping to see me break down, but all he saw was my distant, disinterested calm. Nothing mattered anymore, so there would be no breakdown, no drama. He lit a cigarette. Through the curling smoke, he asked his lawyer to draft a supplementary agreement. The compensation was doubled. I didn't refuse. I signed my name and left. Today, picking up the divorce certificate was no different. I just wanted the process over with. The staff's questions only made me feel irritated, not much else. After checking everything, the divorce was finalized. But Thomas, from start to finish, had been completely absent-minded. The staff had to repeat themselves several times just to get a response out of him. As we stepped out of the bureau, rain began to fall. Just as I turned to leave, Thomas called out, "Robin, take care of yourself." I didn't look back. I didn't pause. I just wished that from this point on, our paths would never cross again. The day after the divorce, I departed for Country F. It was my first mission after officially joining Médecins Sans Frontières. When I learned of the conflict there, I didn't hesitate for a second. I applied immediately. Only fewer than 10 people from our country were involved in this operation, because everyone knew this mission was dangerous. There was a real chance we wouldn't all come back alive. Chapter 3. By the time our international aid team arrived in the city of F, it had already been bombed several times. Dust filled the air, blinding our eyes. Desert plants lined the jagged, uneven roads. Every few steps, we saw mutilated bodies of locals lying on the ground. Many of them were children, far too young. Jenny, who came with me, frowned beneath the blazing sun. She had participated in numerous humanitarian missions before. So as a first-timer with MSF, I received a lot of care and guidance from her. "Just ahead is the hospital in F," she said. "Someone will meet us there." I nodded. Inside the field hospital, it was overflowing with the wounded and the dead. Cries of pain and despair echoed from every direction. Even though we didn't speak the same language, the agony in their eyes and voices told us everything. Something unspeakably horrific had happened in F. It felt like hell on earth. The local doctor who received us, Dr. Gassian, was a gentle-eyed middle-aged man. He spoke English and briefed us on the current medical situation and the hospital's capabilities. At the end, he bowed deeply, thanking us for coming all this way, risking our lives to stand in this ravaged land. That evening, after a full day of treating the wounded, Jenny and I were heading back to our temporary quarters when we ran into Dr. Gassian again. He was comforting the grieving family member of a victim. At first, every time I saw someone break down in tears, I would feel breathless and helpless, my eyes brimming. And every time, Jenny would notice, then gently tell me, "This is the path we've chosen. This is part of it. Robin, stay strong." I would wipe away my tears and nod. Under her steady guidance, I gradually adapted to the atmosphere. A few days later, When I saw another crying family, I could finally hold back the tears. My eyes only reddened. But then, the unthinkable happened. News came suddenly. Dr. Gassian's son had been brought to the hospital morgue. He was only 6 years old. When Gassian heard the news, he fell silent mid-sentence. His face turned ashen. He stood frozen for several minutes before finally summoning the courage to see his son's body. But when he saw the lifeless little boy lying on the stretcher, missing a leg, he couldn't hold it in any longer. He covered his face and wept so hard he couldn't stand. Eventually, a group of grieving families helped carry him away. As he passed me, he reached out and grabbed the sleeve of my coat. His voice trembled. "Please, save the children. Save my country." And that was the moment. The sobs I had been choking down finally burst out. The pain was overwhelming, and I began to lose consciousness. In that haze, I felt like one of the countless refugees who had lost loved ones here. Alive, but lifeless. Crying. I turned to Jenny, my whole body shaking. He saved so many people. Why couldn't he save his own child? Jenny didn't answer, but I knew she understood even more deeply than I did. She had a 5-year-old daughter, standing beside me. She sighed and wept. At that time, we thought, if this experience were a book, we had just reached the darkest chapter. We didn't expect. Chapter 4. The next day, the third batch of humanitarian supplies from our country arrived. Jenny and I were assigned to help distribute them at the landing site. Once the supplies were handed out, we got back in the truck to return to the hospital. But suddenly, we heard a series of explosions from the direction of F's Field Hospital. My hands clenched the truck's door handle. I looked at Jenny in panic. "The hospital? It's not." Before she could answer, a giant boulder, thrown by a nearby explosion, hurtled toward us. Boom! A violent crash. My world went black. In the final second before I lost consciousness, I saw my phone light up with an incoming call. The last character looked like yen. I used all the strength I had left to press accept. Then everything faded. When I woke up, it was already the following evening, and 4 was still in my hand. I opened my eyes and tried to move, but my limbs were numb and aching. That's when I noticed a small boy beside me, dark-skinned, from the city of F. His clear, childlike eyes stared at me without blinking. When he saw I was truly awake, he beamed with joy and dashed out of the tent, shouting something in a language I couldn't understand. Soon, he returned with a local doctor, Dr. Bruno. After a brief checkup, Bruno confirmed that I had no major injuries. As I slowly recalled the explosion, I gripped Bruno's hand, panicked. "Doctor, what happened to the hospital? I heard the explosions. It came from that direction." I imagined it, right? Bruno's expression darkened. He shook his head and fell silent. That was all it took. I loosened my grip on his hand. He didn't need to say a word. I already knew the worst had come true. F's Field Hospital had been bombed, destroyed. Suddenly, images of the place flooded my mind. The desperate, hopeful faces of patients' families. The kind-hearted Dr. Gassian. The laughter of recovering children. Doctors and nurses from around the world united in mission. It felt like we had done something important, but also like we had left nothing behind. For the first time, I questioned the meaning of being part of MSF. If everything we did, our efforts, even our lives, could be erased so easily by war, did it mean that no matter how noble our ideals were, in the face of bombs and bloodshed, we'd be reduced to dust, worthless as ashes? Bruno's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. I looked at him blankly. "Ms. Jean, this is a temporary relief site for citizens of F. 5 kilometers from here is the embassy of country F. We received word your family is waiting there for you." F's embassy bordered this war-torn city, but nearly all refugees trying to cross were turned away. Masses of displaced people had gathered here at the border. Though all born from the same land, survival meant they had to watch their own people be slaughtered, powerless to stop it. "Ms. Jean, if you wish to go to the embassy, I can arrange a vehicle." Expressionless, I nodded. I glanced around the tent, but didn't see Jenny. She had been with me in the same car yesterday. Logically, she should have been treated alongside me. A wave of dread surged in my chest. "Dr. Bruno, where's Jenny?" He furrowed his brows slightly, the name unfamiliar at first. After a moment of thought, realization dawned. Jenny, the short-haired doctor? She woke up this morning and went to the nearby refugee camp to assist. A breath of relief escaped me. She was alive. My only comfort left. We hadn't known each other long. But, to me, she was my sole support in the midst of this chaos. It was because of her that I was able to keep going. All right, Dr. Bruno. If you see her again, could you tell her something for me? Tell her I'll find her soon. Bruno nodded without hesitation. He left some medication for me and reminded me to stay hydrated in these harsh conditions. I nodded again and thanked him. Chapter 5. Once the tent quieted down, I finally remembered what Dr. Bruno had said earlier, that a family member was waiting for me at the embassy. But who could it be? Suddenly, I recalled the phone call just before I lost consciousness yesterday. It was from Thomas. Could it be him? No way. He was probably busy preparing to marry Autumn. There's no way he would come looking for me. With that bitter thought, I lifted my arm, trying to reach the cup of water on the table. Before I could, the little boy beside me stood up and handed it to me. He was wearing a Mickey Mouse t-shirt, stained and dusty but still endearing on his tiny frame. He had been sitting quietly by my side all this time, clearly staying to take care of me. I asked him in English what his name was. He tilted his head in slight confusion, then responded in a soft, childlike voice, Hamae. I reached out and gently patted his head. Then I took an apple from the care package Dr. Bruno had left behind and handed it to him. Hamae looked up at me with his onyx black eyes, his expression shy and uncertain. He hesitated, but I firmly placed the apple in his hands. This is an apple, I explained. In China, it symbolizes peace. Hamae stared at the apple, wiped it with his shirt, but didn't eat it. Instead, he tucked it into his pocket. I asked him why. After a moment of silence, he replied with scattered English. I want to save it for my mom. I smiled. Such a kind, thoughtful child. I slowly got out of bed and walked outside to see what was going on. By then, the sun had disappeared from the evening sky. All I could see was the usual layer of yellow dust hovering over the land. Chinese flags waved gently above several tents, fluttering in the breeze. In the distance, I could see the refugee camps. That's probably where Jenny was working. Hamae also looked in the same direction, his tiny brows furrowed in thought like a miniature adult. Seeing that serious look on such a young face, I suddenly felt a small urge to cheer him up. I crouched down so we were eye level and asked him, Hamae, what do you want to be when you grow up? He turned to me, clearly thinking hard about the question. Then a faint, bitter smile crept onto his face. I was expecting the usual answers. To travel the world, earn lots of money, buy a big house. But what he said caught me completely off guard. In kids don't grow up. The hand I had lifted to smooth out his shirt stopped in midair. My smile froze. A sharp sting hit my nose. I stared at this child, born into war, raised in it, no more than 5 years old, yet already more aware of his fate than most elders. He said he wouldn't grow up. I forced a small smile, trying to treat his words like a child's silly joke. No, Hamae, you will grow up, I said gently. When you do, you can come to my country. I'll show you around that beautiful land. At the mention of China, his eyes finally brightened. He told me his mother had talked about it, how China had big, silly pandas, the longest, grandest wall in the world, and delicious hot pot and roast duck. He hadn't seen any of those things yet, but he wanted to. I nodded and extended my pinky finger. He looked curious. We do this in my country, I said. It's called a pinky promise. It means two people have made a deal, and the one who breaks it gets punished. With his tiny voice, Hamae mimicked my words, excitement blooming across his face as he locked his pinky with mine. At the time, I truly believed the war would one day end, and for those of us who had already lost so much, there would be nothing more left to lose. Chapter 6. When I arrived at the embassy, I saw my parents waiting anxiously in the reception room. And Thomas, he had actually come. My parents sat on the couch, faces heavy with worry. Their eyes were slightly swollen. The moment they saw me, their expressions finally softened. My mother pulled me into a trembling hug, whispering, "Robin, you're safe. Thank God you're safe." I tried to keep my emotions in check, not wanting them to worry more because of my weakness. But after holding it in all this time, my tears finally fell when I saw their faces. "Robin, this place is too dangerous. Please, come home with us," my father pleaded. At that moment, the fear and dread in my heart surged to their peak. I almost nodded. I was just about to agree, when I remembered Jaime's face as I left, and the apple stuffed in his little pocket. The urge to leave. I stopped it right there. It wasn't time yet, because the bullets hadn't turned into doves. "I'll be fine, Mom. I won't be going near the front lines anymore. Our team is staying at a nearby refugee camp. It's much safer there." My mother still didn't look at ease, but seeing the firmness in my tone, she stopped trying to persuade me. Instead, she pulled me toward Thomas, trying to use him to sway me. After all, both sides of the family knew that while I could be stubborn, Thomas had always been the one person I'd listened to. Back when I insisted on going to Wuhan at the onset of the pandemic, no one could change my mind, until Thomas stepped in and talked me down. But things were different now. Those days were long gone. I no longer listened to anything Thomas had to say. I glanced at my parents, still clearly unaware. Apparently, Thomas and I had silently agreed not to tell either side that we were already divorced. It wasn't until I stood in front of him that I really saw his face. After about 2 weeks apart, Thomas's eyes were bloodshot and ringed with fatigue. The man who always cared about appearances now had stubble covering his jaw. His blue pinstriped shirt was rumpled, the suit wrinkled and disheveled. "Robin, listen to your parents. Let's go home," he said. I shook my head and met his eyes calmly. I had no intention of telling my parents the truth, not because I still felt anything for him, but because I didn't want them, after traveling all this way, to endure another blow. Seeing my cold and firm attitude, Thomas lowered his head in defeat. He must have known that nothing he said could shake me anymore. A moment later, as if making some great decision, he lifted his head and said to my parents with false confidence, "Don't worry, I'll talk to Robin outside. If she insists on staying, I'll stay with her to ensure she's safe." I won't lie, I was surprised. But more than that, I found him pathetic. Once outside the embassy, I couldn't hold back anymore. "So, Thomas, when did you become the devoted type? You're just going to abandon the child growing in Autumn's belly and come risk your life with me?" He didn't respond. He just looked at me, eyes full of guilt and some twisted version of tenderness. It made my skin crawl. "Please don't look at me like that," I said, trying to keep the revulsion out of my voice. But I must have touched a nerve. His nose turned red, and his voice cracked as he finally spoke. How could you come to such a dangerous place alone? Robin, do you have any idea when you answered the phone that day but didn't speak? All I heard on the other end was bombing. I thought you were dead." He took a deep breath and walked to the side. Turning away, he wiped at his eyes over and over with the back of his hand. I didn't sleep a wink. I got on the next flight and came here as soon as I could. "Robin, if you'll come back with me, I'll agree to anything." Anything. The Mediterranean autumn evening was mild, but the wind still carried a chill. Funny how, 3 years ago, Thomas and I had visited this very place together. Back then, during our honeymoon, we traveled across half of Eurasia. One night, under the same kind of autumn breeze, he had held me and said, "This climate is so comfortable. Once we have kids, we should come here every year for a 2-week vacation." But those vows had long since blown away with the wind. Now, as I looked at the tall, worn-out man before me, his face still strikingly handsome despite the fatigue, I let out a soft, cold laugh. "What if I told you to make Autumn get an abortion?" His expression froze, his face twisted in hesitation, in conflict. He clearly hadn't expected me to say that. After a long pause, he finally looked up and answered me, "Okay, I'll make her terminate the pregnancy, but you have to come back with me right now." I scoffed even harder, lifting my wrist. I smoothed back my hair. Seeing his confusion, I said, "Thomas, who do you really love? You say you love me, but you asked for a divorce 5 times in 1 year and cheated on me. You say you love Autumn, But you're willing to make her abort the child for me. You're so deep into your role. You can't even tell what kind of man you are anymore. Honestly, you should just admit you're the villain. As his expression grew more and more awkward, I continued, I'm not going back with you. I still have work to do here. As for whether you stay or not, that's your own. Chapter 7. The sound of bombing near the embassy cut our conversation short. All my thoughts vanished. I scrambled up to higher ground to see where the fire was. It wasn't far. The blasts were coming from the direction of the refugee camp near the border. My heart sank. Jenny, she was still there. I had no energy left to argue with Thomas. Panic rushed over me again as I trembled and grabbed the hem of Thomas's suit jacket. Thomas, didn't you say you'd do anything I asked? Then forget what I said about Autumn and the baby. If you want to be with her, then be with her. I only have one request. Take me to the camp, right now. Thomas was surprised by how quickly my attitude shifted. But once he came to his senses, he actually laughed in disbelief, furious. Robin, have you completely lost your mind? You're rushing to die. Is that it? Do you even understand what it means to go there right now? Not even God himself could protect you. You almost died once already. Robin, I'm begging you, please don't. His anger didn't deter me. His voice grew weaker, until it broke into a choke. But I couldn't hear any of it anymore. The explosions were still going off in the distance. The flames danced so bright I could barely keep my eyes open. A deeper dread crawled over me. My entire body shook like a leaf in the wind. I turned to Thomas without hesitation. If you won't take me, I'll find my own way. I walked back into the embassy and asked if there were any vehicles available. The staff told me yes, there were vehicles, but all the drivers had already gone off duty. They warned me that the refugee camp was currently under attack. It was too dangerous to go. They were right, because when Thomas eventually gave in and took me to the border, we found the road completely blocked. We waited the entire night. The wind howled. The bombing had stopped. But the road remained impassable. Exhausted, I crouched down under a quiet patch of wall. Thomas sat beside me. He slowly took off his silver-framed glasses and wiped them with the corner of his shirt. Then he slipped off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. You should leave tomorrow, he said. Stay in country F, it's at least safe. I tried to reason with him. He didn't respond, just gazed up at the sky. Above the vast, barren land, the stars glittered like diamonds, so bright they looked almost within reach. Like a painting stretched across the heavens. The last time I saw stars like this, he said softly, was back in middle school. You were with me then, too. I knew the memory. Thomas and I had both come from a rural village. We were classmates in middle school. On weekends, we'd travel home together from town. We always had to hike through the hills on Friday nights. Back then, the night skies looked just like this, brilliant stars above the broken villages. Later, we both made it out. Moved to the big city. Urban life should have come with its own stars, but all we got was a sky full of smog. Like us, our lives had become more prosperous. But somehow, also more broken. Thomas's gaze dropped from the sky to rest on me. I didn't look away. I returned his stare, cold and unmoved. The regret and guilt in his eyes were unmistakable. Robin, I'm not going back, he said, whether I live or die. Whether you think I'm a hypocrite, none of that matters. I just want to stay here and walk this path with you. He sounded sincere, and I believed him, but I still looked away and didn't respond. Let him do as he pleases. When you walk on the edge of life and death, the only person who can take responsibility for your choices is yourself. I curled up with fatigue creeping in, resting my face against my knees. Not long after, I fell asleep. Chapter 8. By noon the next day, the road finally reopened, but few were going from country F to the border. Most were escaping the other way, wealthier citizens fleeing the city of F. The refugee camp wasn't far, just 5 minutes' drive. Soon, we saw the ruins. Dust choked the sky. The sun blazed overhead. Among the rubble, a few surviving refugees were digging with their bare hands. Their expressions were either blank or utterly broken. Cries echoed through the debris. Dismembered limbs scattered everywhere. It was a scene I'd already grown familiar with back at the field hospital in F. Familiar enough that I thought I could handle it emotionally. But this time, I froze. like a numb outsider watching someone else's tragedy unfold, when a middle-aged refugee suddenly rushed at me, trying to grab my backpack. I didn't even react in time. There was a brief struggle. Thomas stepped in and stopped him, realizing he had failed. The man fell to his knees and begged, muttering broken phrases asking for food and water. He pointed to a child lying motionless in the dust not far away. I understood. I motioned for Thomas to give him a bottle of water and some bread. Thomas frowned, annoyed but complied. He just tried to rob you, and you still want to help him? I packed the rest of our supplies tightly in my bag and answered, I know this isn't enough for more than 2 or 3 people, but if we start a conflict now, it'll only draw more attention, and these supplies will vanish in seconds. It'll bring trouble. We need to move. Finding Jenny is more important. We circled the edges of the ruined camp. Eventually, near the eastern side of the rubble, we saw her. Jenny. She was still alive. There were a few makeshift bandages on her arms. Her face looked pale. She had clearly been working nonstop. Jenny. I'm here. She paused at the sound of my voice. When she turned and saw me, she froze, then gave me that familiar smile. The one she always used to calm me down. You should rest now. I told her. Let me take over from here. I walked toward her and glanced at the injured refugee she'd been treating. Jenny nodded without a word. As she stood up, I handed her a bottle of water. When she took off her gloves, I saw her palms, full of calluses and cuts. As she brushed my wrist, she left behind a smear of blood. She finished the water in one gulp. Sweat rolled down her neck. Then she sat beside me, cross-legged and quiet. Sometimes she glanced at me as I worked. 4 hours passed. When I finished treating the last patient, the sun was setting on the sandy horizon. Jenny stared into the distance, then turned to me and said, Robin, Robin, rebirth. She repeated my name like a quiet chant, soft, thoughtful. Then she smiled. Robin, listen to your name. You were born to be a doctor. That's why you have to keep going. I didn't fully understand, but I nodded. Being a doctor, it's what I chose. And unless something unexpected happens, it's what I'll dedicate my life to. Chapter 9. Once the rescue work wrapped up for the day, Jenny and I stood up, ready to find a place to rest. That's when Thomas, who had been lingering nearby, followed behind us. I didn't know what he had been doing all afternoon, but the torn-up skin on his fingers gave me the answer. Snapping out of my thoughts, I looped my arm through Jenny's and gently rested my head on her shoulder. Then I murmured, I'm just so glad you're alive. When I saw the refugee camp get bombed yesterday, I was really scared. But thank God. My lips curled into a faint smile, relieved, even joyful. The lingering shadow that had weighed down my chest for days finally began to lift. Jenny reached her arm across and patted my head. A quiet gesture of comfort. Just then, my foot kicked something. It rolled several meters ahead and stopped. I walked over, puzzled, bending down in the fading sunset light. I saw what it was. An apple. Its surface was caked in dust. The part where it had been bitten had already turned brown from oxidation. I slowly picked it up, wiping it with the hem of my shirt, and with every motion, I could feel something tightening inside my chest. For no reason at all, sweat trickled down my forehead. Despite the chill in the air, a cold wave crawled down my spine. My eyes scanned the rubble around the apple, and then, in a narrow gap between the debris, under the flashlight beam, I saw it. That familiar Mickey Mouse shirt. Hamae. My mind went completely blank. No, no, no. This can't be. I threw the apple to Jenny. Then, like someone possessed, I lunged at the pile of rubble, digging frantically, mindlessly. Even after falling, I got right back up. I didn't even realize I'd scraped my knees. No, no, no. Sweat mixed with tears blurred my vision. I couldn't form words. I couldn't hear anything. Thomas and Jenny were behind me asking questions. Who is that kid? What's going on? But I blocked it all out. All I could do was dig, hands trembling, scraping, bleeding, moved by instinct, by something deeper than thought. By the time I came back to my senses, my fingertips were covered in open wounds. Blood dripped freely as I finally uncovered Hamae. His small body was already cold. I was a doctor. More than anyone, I knew. He was gone. I took off my jacket and gently laid it over him. Then I cradled him in my arms. 5 years old. Little Hamai, who always acted like such a grown-up. Why? Why was he so light? Children in F don't grow up. His words echoed in my mind. Over and over, like a curse I couldn't shake. Each time I touched his cold skin, it replayed again. Children in F don't grow up. As dusk fell, I wandered aimlessly on weak, unsteady legs. Eventually, I found a quiet corner off the road. There, I used rocks to dig a shallow grave, and gently laid Hami to rest. Once he was buried, all that remained was a tiny mound of earth. I opened my backpack, took out 2 clean apples, and placed them in front of the mound. Hamai, this time there are 2 apples. You don't have to save them both for your mom. You can eat one, too. Chapter 10. Preliminary assessment. She's developed a serious case of post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what Bruno told Thomas. After I was woken by a nightmare for the 9th time in the middle of the night. Panicking, spiraling out of control. The bombings and war-torn scenes kept looping in my mind, and my body reacted far beyond normal. She's lost the ability to regulate her emotions, Bruno said calmly. She needs immediate psychological intervention. The moment I saw Hami's lifeless body, the last string in my mind finally snapped. All the stress I'd bottled up since arriving in F City after the divorce, all the fear buried deep inside, burst forth like a flood. I looked at Jenny, who had come to visit me, and asked quietly, "Am I acting like a deserter?" Jenny shook her head and slowly placed her hand over mine. Her voice was soft, laced with exhaustion. She looked so tired. "Robin, I've been with Medicine Sans Frontieres for 4 years now. And even for me, this has been the most brutal war I've ever experienced. No exaggeration. So for your first humanitarian mission to end up like this, it's already remarkable that you lasted this long." I lowered my eyes and slowly tightened my grip on her hand. Thomas had already booked the flight to bring me home. A doctor who could no longer save lives had no place in a war zone. All I would do now is take up space and resources. Even the aid team had gently urged me to leave. Jenny saw the numbness in my face and continued to comfort me. "Don't be sad, Robin. Wait for me back home, okay? When I return, we'll go travel together, unwind a bit, leave everything here to me, for now." Looking at her, barely holding herself together while still trying to encourage me, I finally nodded slowly. After returning to my home country, I began treatment for PTSD, transcranial magnetic stimulation and EEG therapy. But due to prolonged exposure to both treatments, my memory began to deteriorate. I slept longer each day. Every time I opened my eyes, I'd see Thomas standing silently by the window in my hospital room. He had changed. Ever since going to F City, the restlessness in his gaze had faded. Now, whenever our eyes met, I saw a mess of remorse, longing, and sorrow swirling inside. He always looked like he wanted to say something, but never found the words. Nearly every time, I told him not to come again, but it was like he never heard me. Not a single day did he miss. One early autumn evening, I was resting. Suddenly, voices arguing broke out just outside my door. A young woman was crying and yelling, "Thomas, I already did what you asked. I had the abortion. So why are you still breaking up with me? I don't even care about being your wife anymore. Just let me stay with you. Please. I really love you." Autumn's voice echoed sharply in the hospital hallway. I wanted to get up and remind them this was a hospital, not a place to scream. Is it because of her? That damn Robin? She's the reason I lost my child. She's haunting you, isn't she? Still clinging to you like a ghost. I'll kill her. Then we can finally be together. Hearing this, I sighed and rubbed my forehead. Just what kind of psycho has Thomas gotten involved with? Just as I was about to get out of bed to shut them up, I heard Thomas roar outside. "That's enough. If there's someone to blame, it's me. Don't bring up Robin. I've already compensated you. Don't be ungrateful. If you dare to lay a finger on her, don't blame me for what I'll do next." His voice was cold, sharp, and filled with threat. Autumn went completely silent. A few minutes later, Thomas returned to the room. I was staring at the television news. Thomas. Let me say this again, I said without even turning my head. You don't need to come anymore. I won't go back to you. Not now. Not ever. Thomas pretended not to hear. He picked up my cup, intending to pour me some water. I snatched it from his hand and smashed it hard onto the floor. Don't you understand human language? I said, get lost. Are you deaf? Glass shards scattered all over the floor. I stared him down, unfiltered hatred in my eyes. He froze for a second, then slowly looked up at me. His eyes were red, slightly teary. His gaze held hurt, sorrow, and despair, but he said nothing. That tall man crouched down at my feet and started picking up the glass pieces with his bare hands, just as I was about to say something more. The news broadcast caught both our attention. The UN General Assembly has passed a resolution on the F region, with 130 votes in favor and 4 against. The resolution calls for an immediate and sustained humanitarian ceasefire and the urgent delivery of basic supplies and services to civilians across the F zone. My eyes gradually shifted to the screen. It had been 2 months since the war began. Finally, the international community was stepping in. Jenny, she should be able to return home soon. Just a week ago, she messaged me saying she was safe. Thomas also turned his eyes to the screen. Seeing my mood softening slightly, he gently spoke. I'm sorry, Robin. I really failed you before. After going to F City, I've reflected on everything. I know it's too much to ask for forgiveness, but I hope you'll at least let me help you during your recovery. Whatever peace I'd begun to feel shattered again. I didn't respond. I simply pointed at the door, telling him to leave. Chapter 11. Not long after the humanitarian ceasefire between the F City region and Country G, Country G began to gradually withdraw from the conflict due to immense international moral condemnation and the mounting negative political impact. Finally, after 2 months, both sides ceased hostilities. Around the same time, my condition also came under effective control and treatment. After being discharged from the hospital, I only needed to return for treatment every other day. That morning, I was at home preparing breakfast while the news played on the television. The international segment began reporting on the post-war recovery in Country F. Seeing the refugees start to smile again under the support of the international community lifted my spirits. I was just about to pour cat food for my silver-shaded British short hair when the news anchor's somber tone broke the air. During the FG conflict, many of our nation's international rescue workers went to the war zone to offer humanitarian aid, demonstrating our country's commitment to global compassion. As refugees fled through the night, a group of brave souls rushed straight into the jaws of death. They faced not only constant armed conflict, but also a critically fragile medical system. Among them, Comrade Bruno, Comrade Jenny, and Comrade Lucas unfortunately lost their lives in the line of duty. Clatter! The ceramic cat bowl slipped from my numbed hands and shattered on the floor. I turned to the TV screen. Jenny's black and white photo appeared. Behind her, a line of text read, Doctors Without Borders, a beam of light walking through hell. My vision blurred, and all I could hear was the cat meowing softly as it rubbed against my leg. I couldn't react. The pain surging in my skull started stripping away my consciousness. I couldn't fully grasp the reality that Jenny was gone. I should have been devastated, but all I could think about was what she said before leaving. When I come back, let's take a relaxing trip together. Jenny, it seems we won't get to do that anymore. Just then, my alarm went off. It took me a long while to pull myself together and realize I only had half an hour left until my doctor's appointment. Maybe I should have stayed and rested? But I didn't want to. I wanted to recover quickly so I could still go traveling with Jenny. That last shred of sanity crumbled. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside. In my mind, one sentence kept repeating, Jenny, I'm waiting for you to come back. The sudden screech of brakes snapped me to alertness, and in that moment, a force shoved me hard from behind. My head hit the ground. I could feel blood trickling out. My vision dimmed. Am I dying? Maybe that's okay. 2. Chapter 12. When I opened my eyes again, I heard the faint sounds of someone sobbing. Robin, you're finally awake. It was my parents. I had worried them. Again. Their eyes were swollen and red. It looked like they'd cried for a long time. I frowned slightly. The pain in my head hadn't eased. Everything looked hazy. Robin, Thomas is still in the ICU. He was hit by a car while trying to save you. He's badly injured. I stared blankly. No reaction. So it was Thomas who pushed me out of harm's way. Should I be grateful? Maybe, but honestly, I felt nothing for him. My thoughts kept circling back to Jenny. The doctors told me my condition had worsened since the beginning. It would require long-term treatment again. Forget going back to work, just living a normal life would be a challenge. As for becoming a doctor with Doctors Without Borders again, that dream was pretty much a joke now. I'm sorry, Jenny. I don't think I can hold on anymore. Chapter 13. About 3 months later, a middle-aged woman and a little girl I didn't recognize came into my hospital room. The woman looked timid as she gently tugged the girl forward, her expression awkward and uncertain. Excuse me. Are you Robin, Jenny's friend? My gaze stopped on the little girl. Her features felt vaguely familiar. Yes, I said. The woman's face lit up slightly. Then she spoke. Miss Jean, this is Jenny's daughter, Anna. After Jenny passed, a few of us relatives discussed for a long time who would take care of her. But honestly, our financial situations aren't great. We just don't have the resources to raise a child. So we wanted to ask if maybe you, Anna. I murmured softly. So this little girl was Jenny's child. I'll take her in, I said, cutting the woman off before she could finish. She's Jenny's daughter. Of course. I'd raise her. Anna's arrival changed everything for me. Looking closely, her facial features were strikingly similar to Jenny's. Even her personality carried that same carefree, generous spirit. Once I had mostly recovered, I moved with Anna to another coastal city. The doctor had said a peaceful, unfamiliar environment would help my mental state, so I settled into a seaside villa. The settlement I received from divorcing Thomas was more than enough to support Anna and me for the rest of our lives. Some time later, I heard from others what had really happened. In that car accident, Thomas had been severely injured while protecting me. Though he survived, the impact left him permanently disabled. He would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. As for the driver who hit us, it turned out, whether by fate or coincidence, it had been Autumn. Eventually, Autumn was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to life imprisonment just the day before. Back then, outside the hospital, all those insane ramblings she'd said, turns out, she really meant them. I gently stroked Anna's hair as she sat beside me watching cartoons. She looked up at me, confusion flickering in those strong, determined eyes she'd inherited from her mother. You look so much like her, I said. Anna nodded, then tucked her head into my lap. Sleepily, she mumbled, Auntie Jean. I want to hear more stories about Mommy. Can you keep telling me? Her soft, milk-sweet voice made the corners of my mouth lift in a smile. She really loved hearing these stories. She even longed for them. Your mommy, you know, joined her first overseas mission with Doctors Without Borders in a faraway place. I began. There, a 14-year civil war had just ended, and millions of people had been displaced. She once told me that babies there were named by the day of the week they were born, Monday to Sunday. Only those who survived their first week would receive an actual name. A year later, she went to Hoscon. Half an hour later, Anna's breathing turned soft and steady. She'd fallen asleep, under the warm, dim light. I could hear the sound of waves crashing gently outside on the balcony. I told Jenny stories every night, her medical missions, her bravery, as Anna's bedtime tales. I told her that her mother was a hero. She couldn't stay with Anna, and maybe she hadn't been a perfect mother, but she was a great doctor. A doctor who walked the world, a Chinese doctor with no borders. As the waves echoed in the night, sleep began to tug at me too. In that drowsy haze, everything around me felt like it had returned to my childhood. Back then, I too had sat under candlelight, listening to my father tell stories of my great-grandfather, how he became a battlefield medic during the war. He passed that dream on to me, and now, I wanted to pass on the dream of sending white doves flying across the world. Chapter 14. 2 years later, a new country was formally established on the original territory of Country F. The hard-won peace, fought over so many years, had finally arrived. That summer, when Anna was in 3rd grade, I took her on a trip to Beijing. One afternoon, while we were climbing the Great Wall, a little boy suddenly grabbed my hand. I turned around. It was a foreign child. He looked about 5 or 6 years old. His obsidian-like eyes stunned me for a moment. In his hand, he held 2 small flags. The boy looked up and, in tender, childish English, asked, "Can you take a picture of me and my mommy, please?" My nose suddenly stung with emotion. I nodded and crouched down to help the little boy and his mother take a few photos, capturing the moment. And just like that, a memory came flooding back to me. That boy from F City, his pockets bulging with apples. His name was Hamai. He once made me a promise that one day, he would come to China to see the longest and greatest wall in the world.